Discovering his son's secret relationship with the maid's daughter, the millionaire reacts in a way that surprises everyone, challenging preconceived notions and family expectations. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Sinclair estate as Gregory Sinclair stood at his study window, his attention fixed on the scene unfolding in the garden below. His son Tyler, heir to the Sinclair fortune, wasn't reviewing investment portfolios or attending business meetings as Gregory had hoped. Instead, he was engaged in animated conversation with Aaliyah Morrison, one of the household's domestic staff. Gregory watched as Tyler gestured enthusiastically, making Aaliyah laugh. Her uniform, though pristine, marked a stark contrast to Tyler's tailored casual wear. The way Tyler leaned in when she spoke, the manner in which his eyes followed her movements. These weren't the polite interactions between employer and employee. Gregory recognized the signs of attraction, having experienced them himself in his younger years. The discovery didn't immediately anger him, which surprised Gregory more than the situation itself. Instead, he felt an uncomfortable mixture of concern and curiosity. As a businessman who had built his empire through calculated decisions, Gregory found himself analyzing the situation with the same methodical approach he applied to his ventures. Later that evening, Gregory called Tyler into his study. The room, with its dark wood paneling and leather-bound books, had always served as a space for serious conversations. Tyler entered with confidence, though Gregory noticed a slight tension in his son's shoulders. "I saw you with Aaliyah today," Gregory stated plainly, watching his son's reaction carefully. "Would you care to explain?" Tyler's response was immediate and passionate, catching Gregory off guard. "There's nothing to explain, Dad. I care about her. She's intelligent, kind, and more genuine than anyone I've met in our social circle." "She's a maid, Tyler," Gregory said, testing his son's resolve. "She's working as a maid to put herself through college," Tyler countered, his voice steady. "She's studying business administration and economics. She works harder than anyone I know, and yes, I love her." The word love hung in the air between them. Gregory turned to face the window again, his mind drifting to memories of his own father's study decades ago. He remembered standing in Tyler's position, defending different choices that didn't align with the Sinclair family expectations. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Sinclairs marry within their class, Gregory. It's not about love, it's about maintaining our position in society." Those words had shaped his life choices, leading him to marry Elizabeth, a union that looked perfect on paper but lacked the passion he now witnessed between his son and Aaliyah. Gregory's reflection in the window showed a man who had achieved everything his father had wanted for him: wealth, status, power. Yet watching Tyler stand firm in his convictions stirred something long dormant in Gregory's chest. He recognized in his son's defiance a courage he had once possessed but had buried beneath years of conforming to societal expectations. The silence stretched between father and son until Gregory finally turned back to face Tyler. His son's expression remained resolute, reminding Gregory of himself at that age, before the weight of family legacy had altered his course. The parallels were impossible to ignore, forcing Gregory to confront his own choices and their consequences. "Tell me more about her," Gregory said finally, the words surprising both of them. As Tyler began speaking, Gregory listened with genuine interest, noting how his son's face lit up when describing Aaliyah's ambitions and character. The conversation etched late into the evening, evolving from an interrogation into a genuine dialogue between father and son. This moment marked a turning point for Gregory. While watching his son defend his love for Aaliyah, he began questioning the values he had accepted without challenge for so long. The boundaries between social classes, the expectations of their peers, the definition of success. All of these suddenly seemed less absolute than they had just hours before. Gregory's decision to invite Aaliyah to dinner came during a restless morning meeting. While his business partners droned on about quarterly projections, his mind kept returning to Tyler's words from their conversation. Breaking from his usual measured approach, Gregory pulled out his phone and typed a message to Mrs. Hughes, the head housekeeper. Please inform Aaliyah that her presence is requested at dinner this Friday evening. As a guest, not staff. The message sent ripples through the household staff within hours. Gregory could sense the shift in atmosphere as he walked through his home that afternoon. The subtle pauses in conversation, the questioning glances, the hushed whispers that ceased when he approached. He maintained his usual composure, though internally he questioned whether he had just made a catastrophic social mistake. Elizabeth cornered him in their private sitting room that evening, her perfectly manicured hands clutching a crystal tumbler of bourbon, a sure sign of her agitation. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she demanded, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Do you have any idea what people will say?" "People always talk, Elizabeth," Gregory responded, pouring himself a drink. "They talk when I merged with Richardson Tech, they talked when we bought the summer house in Martha's Vineyard, and they'll talk about this." "This is different," Elizabeth snapped. "This isn't business. This is our son getting involved with the help, and you're encouraging it by inviting her to dinner." "The Carmichaels will be there, Gregory." "The Carmichaels? Do you want Jonathan Carmichael questioning your judgment during your next board meeting?" Gregory watched the ice cubes shift in his glass. "Maybe it's time we questioned our own judgment, Elizabeth." "Tyler sees something in her dash." "Tyler is young and naive," Elizabeth interrupted. "He doesn't understand how this world works. We've worked too hard to maintain our position in society to throw it away over some romantic notion." The words struck uncomfortably close to those of Gregory's father years ago. He set his glass down with more force than necessary. "And what has that position gotten us? A son who barely spoke to us until recently? Friends who measure our worth by our bank accounts?" Elizabeth's face flushed. "Don't pretend this is about some moral awakening, Gregory. You're letting Tyler's infatuation cloud your judgment. What's next? Shall we invite the gardener to golf at the country club?" "This isn't about the gardener," Gregory said firmly. "This is about Aaliyah, who, according to Tyler, is working her way through college while supporting her younger siblings. It's about our son finding someone who makes him happy, regardless of her background." "Happy?" Elizabeth laughed bitterly. "Was happiness ever the point? You didn't marry me for happiness, Gregory. You married me because it was the right thing to do for your family's legacy." The truth in her words hung heavy in the air between them. Gregory struggled to find a response that wouldn't make the situation worse. "Maybe that's exactly why we should support Tyler's choice," he finally said, his voice softer. "Maybe he's braver than we ever were." Elizabeth set her empty glass down with a sharp click. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice cold. "When this blows up in our faces, remember that I warned you." She turned and left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors. Alone in the sitting room, Gregory faced the weight of his decision. He knew Elizabeth was right about one thing. This dinner would have consequences. The social circle they had cultivated over decades operated on unwritten rules, and he was about to break several of them. Yet something about taking this stand felt right in a way that few of his recent decisions had. He walked to the window, looking out over the manicured gardens where he had first observed Tyler and Aaliyah together. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn, much like the shadows of doubt now creeping across his certainty. But beneath the doubt, a small voice, one that sounded remarkably like his younger self, whispered that some things were worth the risk. In the modest two-bedroom apartment she shared with her siblings, Aaliyah stood frozen, still holding the formal dinner invitation Mrs. Hughes had handed her. The cream-colored paper felt heavy in her hands, the elegant script announcing a dinner she never expected to attend. Her younger sister Maria watched from the kitchen doorway, concern evident on her face. "You're going, right?" Tyler's voice came through her phone's speaker, his excitement palpable even through the digital connection. "Dad actually wants to get to know you." "This is huge, Aaliyah." Aaliyah sank onto their worn couch, her work uniform still on from her shift at the Sinclair mansion. "Tyler, I clean their house. I serve their meals. How am I supposed to sit at their table like I belong there?" Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the anxiety she'd been trying to suppress. "You belong anywhere you choose to be," Tyler said firmly. "Look, I know my father can be intimidating, but him extending this invitation, it means something. He doesn't do anything without purpose." Aaliyah ran her fingers over the embossed lettering of the invitation. Your mother probably hates the idea. I've seen how she looks at me when we cross paths in the hallway. Like I'm something that needs to be cleaned up. Mom will come around, Tyler said, though Aaliyah detected a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Just be yourself. That's who I fell in love with, and that's who they need to see. They talked for another hour, Tyler sharing stories about previous family dinners, warning her about his mother's passive-aggressive tendencies, and reassuring her about his father's unexpected support. By the time they hung up, Aaliyah felt marginally more confident, though her stomach still churned with anxiety. The next day, Aaliyah visited the only decent clothing store in her neighborhood, her savings card burning a hole in her pocket. She had been setting aside money for her next semester's textbooks, but this felt equally important. The store clerk, sensing her uncertainty, helped her select a navy blue dress that walked the line between elegant and understated. It's perfect, Maria declared when Aaliyah modeled it at home. Classic, but not trying too hard. And the color brings out your eyes. Aaliyah studied her reflection in their bathroom mirror, noting how the dress highlighted her natural grace while maintaining simplicity. She had deliberately avoided anything too flashy or expensive-looking, wanting to present herself honestly rather than trying to mimic the wealthy women she'd observed at the mansion. The night of the dinner arrived with startling speed. As Aaliyah prepared, she thought about her mother, who had passed away 3 years ago. Always hold your head high, she used to say. Your worth isn't in your wallet, it's in your heart. The memory brought both comfort and a fresh wave of nervousness. At precisely 6:30 p.m., the Sinclair's dark blue Mercedes pulled up outside her apartment building. The driver, Mr. Peterson, whom she knew from her work at the mansion, stepped out and opened the back door with a warm smile. "Evening, Miss Morrison," he said, and the familiar face helped ease some of her tension. As the car pulled away from her neighborhood, Aaliyah watched the Millionaire'S streets give way to increasingly upscale surroundings. The contrast between her world and Tyler's had never felt more stark. Yet instead of feeling intimidated, she felt a growing determination. She had worked hard her entire life, cleaning houses to support her siblings after their mother's death, maintaining excellent grades despite working full-time, never letting circumstances defeat her. The Mercedes glided through the gates of the Sinclair estate, the gravel crunching beneath its tires. Through the tinted windows, Aaliyah could see the mansion ablaze with lights, looking more imposing than it ever had during her working hours. As Mr. Peterson opened her door, she took a deep breath, channeling her mother's strength. "Remember," she whispered to herself, smoothing her dress as she stepped out of the car, "you're not just representing yourself tonight. You're representing everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." The grand entrance of the Sinclair mansion, usually a space Aaliyah navigated quietly with cleaning supplies, now loomed before her like a theatrical stage. The familiar faces of the household staff wore unfamiliar expressions, a mix of curiosity, concern, and in some cases, barely concealed judgment. Sarah, who usually chatted with her during lunch breaks, quickly averted her eyes when Aaliyah entered. "Miss Morrison," announced Jenkins, the butler who had trained her when she first started working at the mansion. His tone was perfectly professional, though Aaliyah detected a slight tremor in his voice, as if he was struggling with this role reversal. "Mr. Sinclair and the other guests are gathering in the main parlor." As Jenkins led her through the familiar corridors, Aaliyah heard the murmur of voices and the gentle clinking of crystal glasses. She recognized the sounds from her countless times serving at similar gatherings, but now they carried a different weight. The clicking of her modest heels against the marble floor seemed to echo unnaturally loud in her ears. The parlor doors opened, and conversation momentarily ceased. Aaliyah felt dozens of eyes turn toward her, scanning her appearance, judging her worth. She recognized several faces from society magazines and charity galas she had worked at, the elite of their city's social circle. Gregory Sinclair broke the awkward silence, stepping forward with surprising warmth. "Aaliyah, welcome," he said, his voice carrying across the room with authority. "Please, let me introduce you to everyone." The deliberate use of her first name, rather than Miss Morrison, sent a clear message to the room. Tyler appeared at her side, offering his arm with a reassuring smile. As they moved through the room, Gregory made introductions with careful precision. "This is Jonathan and Margaret Carmichael," he said, presenting an older couple whose names Aaliyah recognized from countless business conversations she'd overheard. "Jonathan chairs our board of directors." "Charming," Margaret Carmichael said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "And what exactly do you do, dear?" The pause was deliberate, though Gregory had already mentioned her role at the university. "I'm studying business administration and economics," Aaliyah replied steadily, remembering her mother's words about holding her head high. "Currently, I'm particularly interested in sustainable development and social enterprise." "How progressive," Margaret responded, her tone suggesting this wasn't a compliment. "And you work here as well? I understand?" Before Aaliyah could respond, Gregory smoothly interjected. "Aaliyah has demonstrated remarkable drive, maintaining excellent academic standing while supporting her family. Rather reminds me of my own father's start in business." The comparison drew several sharp looks from the older guests. Elizabeth Sinclair, who had been maintaining a careful distance, visibly stiffened. The room's atmosphere grew heavier with unspoken tensions. As they moved to the dining room, Aaliyah found herself seated between Tyler and an elderly gentleman introduced as Professor Hammond, a longtime family friend. The table setting was immaculate. She recognized the Wedgwood china she had carefully handled dozens of times while working. "So, tell me," drawled Charles Winchester III, a banking executive seated across from her, his voice carrying deliberately across the table. "How does one go from folding linens to dining on them? Quite a promotion, wouldn't you say?" The comment landed like a physical blow. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others poorly concealed their smirks behind wine glasses. Tyler's hand clenched into a fist under the table. Aaliyah felt the weight of the moment. How she responded would set the tone for the entire evening. She remembered all the times she had stood silently in this very room, serving people who had never bothered to learn her name, who had talked about the help as if they were furniture. Looking Charles Winchester III directly in the eyes, Aaliyah responded with quiet dignity. "I suppose that depends on whether one measures promotion by thread count or character, Mr. Winchester. In my experience, true worth isn't determined by which side of the table you're sitting on." A few guests inhaled sharply. Professor Hammond coughed to hide what sounded suspiciously like a chuckle. Gregory Sinclair's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes suggested approval. Gregory Sinclair set his wine glass down with deliberate precision, his eyes fixed on Charles Winchester III. The tension in the room was palpable, like a string pulled too tight. "You know, Charles," he began, his voice carrying the weight of decades of business authority, "I've always found it fascinating how some measure success solely by inheritance, while others earn it through merit." The pointed comment wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Charles's family wealth was old money, passed down through generations, unlike Gregory's self-made fortune. Winchester's face reddened slightly as he adjusted his bow tie. "What I find particularly interesting," Gregory continued, his voice growing stronger, "is how often we overlook true potential simply because it doesn't come wrapped in the package we expect. When I started my first company, many people at this very table refused to invest. They couldn't see past my father's position as a factory manager." Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly torn between her social instincts and her husband's unexpected stance. The other guests watched the exchange like spectators at a tennis match, their soup spoons forgotten in their hands. "If I may," Aaliyah spoke up, her voice quiet but steady. "My mother used to clean houses just like I do. She worked for families like yours, Mr. Winchester, and she taught me something valuable about dignity." She paused, ensuring she had everyone's attention. She said that true dignity isn't about what you own or where you live. It's about how you treat others, especially those who can't do anything for you in return. The raw honesty in her voice seemed to touch something in the room. Several guests looked down at their plates, perhaps remembering their own family histories or questioning their initial judgments. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Professor Hammond commented kindly. "Is she still with us?" Aaliyah's expression softened with a mixture of pride and sadness. "She passed away 3 years ago," Cancer. She worked until 2 weeks before she died, refusing to let her children drop out of school to support the family. She kept saying education was our ticket to a better life. And yet here you are, still cleaning houses, Margaret Carmichael observed, though her tone had lost some of its earlier sharpness. Yes, here I am, Aaliyah agreed, meeting her gaze. Working my way through college, supporting my younger siblings, and refusing to be ashamed of honest work. My mother taught me that too. Gregory leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. Tell us more about your family, Aaliyah. Tyler mentioned you're raising your siblings? As Aaliyah shared stories about her younger sister's academic achievements and her brother's athletic scholarships, the atmosphere in the room began to shift. She spoke about late nights helping with homework while studying for her own exams, about budgeting every penny, about the pride she felt watching her siblings thrive despite their circumstances. Elizabeth Sinclair watched this transformation with growing unease. The other guests were becoming engaged in Aaliyah's story, asking questions, showing interest. Even Jonathan Carmichael, known for his social rigidity, was nodding appreciatively at Aaliyah's description of her academic goals. You remind me of someone, Gregory said suddenly, his expression thoughtful. There's something familiar about your determination, your way of speaking. He trailed off, looking troubled for a moment before covering it with a smile. Elizabeth noticed her husband's strange reaction, adding it to her growing list of concerns. She observed how Gregory seemed almost paternally proud of Aaliyah's accomplishments, how his eyes crinkled with genuine warmth when she spoke. It was an expression she hadn't seen directed at her in years. The conversation continued to flow, touching on childhood memories and future aspirations. Aaliyah spoke about her dream of starting a foundation to help working students, while Tyler proudly described how they'd met. Him struggling with a statistics assignment in the university library, her offering help despite having just finished a long shift at the mansion. As the evening progressed, guests began making their excuses and departing, each exit shifting the dynamic in the room. The Carmichaels left with puzzled but thoughtful expressions, Jonathan actually pausing to shake Aaliyah's hand. The Winchesters departed stiffly, Charles still smarting from Gregory's earlier rebuke. With fewer people present, the atmosphere became more intimate. Tyler and Aaliyah sat close together on one of the parlor's antique sofas, their shoulders touching lightly as they talked about their shared dreams. The formal dinner had transformed into something more personal, more real. We've been thinking about starting a community education program, Tyler explained, his enthusiasm evident. Aaliyah's idea, actually, using empty office spaces in the business district as evening classrooms for working students. Gregory, who had been listening intently, leaned forward in his leather armchair. Tell me more about this program, he said, his business instincts awakening. What's your vision for it? Aaliyah straightened, her eyes lighting up with passion. Many of my classmates work full-time like I do. They struggle to attend regular classes, can't afford textbooks, and don't have quiet places to study. We could create learning hubs, places with computers, internet access, and tutoring services. The Sinclair Foundation could provide initial funding, Tyler added, glancing at his father. We could start with one location, prove the concept works. Why think small? Gregory interrupted, standing up and walking to the fireplace. We own several buildings downtown that are only partially occupied. With proper planning, we could launch multiple locations simultaneously. Elizabeth, who had been quietly observing from her position near the window, felt her world shifting beneath her feet. It wasn't just about a dinner anymore. Her husband was getting invested in this girl's vision. Their son was planning a future that diverged sharply from the carefully laid path she'd envisioned for him. Gregory, she said sharply, perhaps we should discuss this another time. It's getting late, and No, Elizabeth, Gregory cut in, his voice firm. This is exactly what the Sinclair Foundation needs. We've been hosting charity galas and golf tournaments, but what have we really accomplished? This program could make a real difference. He turned to Aaliyah, his expression intense. Would you be willing to head this project? Work with our foundation team to develop the framework. Aaliyah blinked in surprise. I'd be honored, Mr. Sinclair, but I still have a year left in my degree program, and my siblings. We'll work around your schedule, Gregory assured her. The foundation can provide a salary that would allow you to focus on your studies and the project without worrying about other jobs. Elizabeth's wine glass clinked sharply against the side table as she set it down. Gregory, you can't be serious. You're offering her a position in our foundation? What about her current role? I think Aaliyah has proven she's capable of much more than household duties, Gregory replied, an edge of challenge in his voice. Besides, this project could be exactly what we need to modernize our philanthropic efforts. Tyler squeezed Aaliyah's hand supportively, watching the exchange between his parents with growing concern. The tension between them was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. Elizabeth's perfectly maintained composure began to crack. And what will people say? First, we invite the maid to dinner, and now you want to put her in charge of a foundation project? Have you completely lost your mind? Mom, Tyler started, but Gregory held up his hand. What people say has dictated our lives for too long, he said quietly. I've watched this young woman handle herself with more grace and dignity tonight than many of our so-called society friends have shown in years. She has vision, intelligence, and most importantly, she understands the real needs of the people we claim to want to help. After the final guest departed, the tension in the Sinclair mansion erupted. Elizabeth paced the private family room, her composure finally shattering. Do you have any idea what you've done tonight? She demanded, rounding on Gregory. Jonathan Carmichael texted during dinner. The board members are already talking. Tyler and Aaliyah remained in their seats, their hands still clasped, watching the confrontation unfold. The intimate family setting made the conflict feel more raw, more personal than the carefully controlled tensions of dinner. Let them talk, Gregory responded, loosening his tie. The board members serve at my discretion, not the other way around. Besides, Jonathan seemed quite impressed by Aaliyah's ideas. Impressed? Elizabeth laughed bitterly. He was being polite, Gregory. That's what we do in our circle. We smile and nod and then discuss the scandal over breakfast at the country club tomorrow. She turned to Aaliyah, her careful facade cracking completely. No offense, dear, but you have no idea what you're walking into. This isn't some fairy tale where Cinderella gets to keep the glass slipper. Mother! Tyler stood up, his face flushing with anger. You don't get to speak to her that way. I'll speak however I want in my own home, Elizabeth snapped. This girl may have charmed you both, but I'm the one who has to face our friends, who has to explain why my son is throwing away his future on Dash. On what, Elizabeth? Gregory interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. On someone who worked her way through college while raising her siblings? On someone who shows more genuine intelligence and grace than half the debutantes you've tried to set Tyler up with? Elizabeth's hands trembled as she poured herself another drink. You're compromising everything we've built. Our position, our relationships, our legacy, Dash. Our legacy? Gregory's voice rose. What legacy? Money? Social status? Empty charity events where we congratulate ourselves for writing checks? Maybe it's time we built something real. Aaliyah stood slowly, her movement drawing all eyes in the room. Perhaps I should go, she said quietly. This is clearly a family matter. No, Tyler said firmly, tightening his grip on her hand. You're part of this now. We're not hiding anymore. Elizabeth turned to the window, her shoulders rigid. Part of this? She works for us, Tyler. She cleans our house. How can you not see how inappropriate this is? That's enough, Gregory's voice cut through the tension. Aaliyah has proven herself more than worthy of our respect. And if our friends can't see that, perhaps we need new friends. New friends? Elizabeth whirled around, her eyes glistening. You want to throw away 30 years of relationships? Our entire social circle? For what? Because our son has a crush on the help. This isn't a crush, Mom, Tyler interjected. I love her. And if you just take a moment to actually know her, Dash, know her. Elizabeth's voice cracked. I know exactly who she is. She's the girl who's going to cost us everything we've worked for, everything we've sacrificed for. She turned to Gregory. Everything we gave up our own dreams for. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Gregory's expression shifted, something painful flickering across his features. Aaliyah watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about her. and Tyler anymore. They had unknowingly stumbled into deeper, older wounds. The following morning, Gregory Sinclair deviated from his usual routine. Instead of heading to his downtown office, he directed his driver to take him to the address listed in Aaliyah's employee file. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to his usual surroundings. Modest apartment buildings mixed with small businesses, children playing on concrete instead of manicured lawns. He stepped out of his Mercedes, ignoring the curious glances from locals not used to seeing luxury vehicles in their area. The morning sun felt different here, somehow more direct without the shelter of his estate's mature trees. Gregory walked the streets, observing the daily life unfolding around him. A small cafe caught his attention, Maria's Morning Glory, where he spotted several young people in uniforms similar to those worn by his household staff, grabbing quick breakfasts before their commutes. He entered, the bell above the door announcing his presence. Coffee black, he ordered, taking in the worn but clean interior. The barista, a young woman working efficiently behind the counter, reminded him of Aaliyah, the same determined focus, the same quiet dignity. "You're Aaliyah's boss, aren't you?" the barista asked as she handed him his coffee. "I'm Jenny. I've seen you at the mansion when I fill in sometimes." Gregory nodded, surprised to be recognized. "I am. Do you know her well?" "Everyone knows Aaliyah here," Jenny replied, gesturing to a wall covered with community notices and flyers. "She tutors kids for free on weekends, helps organize food drives. She's like our neighborhood's guardian angel." As Gregory examined the wall, he found multiple flyers in Aaliyah's handwriting: study groups, job posting shares, community support meetings. The reality of her life beyond his mansion began to take shape. Outside again, he encountered more stories. The owner of a small bookstore spoke of how Aaliyah had created a textbook sharing program for working students. An elderly man described how she helped his grandson apply for college scholarships. Each story painted a picture of someone who didn't just survive in difficult circumstances, but actively worked to improve them for others. Meanwhile, across town, Elizabeth sought refuge at the Southampton Country Club, where her friends were already gathered for their regular morning tennis session. As she predicted, the previous night's dinner was the main topic of conversation. "Darling, what were you thinking?" Victoria Ashworth asked, her tennis bracelet catching the morning light. "Letting the help sit at your table? It sets a dangerous precedent." "It wasn't my decision," Elizabeth replied tightly, gripping her water glass. Gregory has become unpredictable lately. Patricia Carmichael, Jonathan's wife, leaned in. "Jonathan says Gregory's been acting strange in board meetings too. All this talk about corporate responsibility and community investment. It's not like him. He's always been a businessman first," Catherine Winchester added. "Charles is concerned about the company's direction. All this focus on social programs could affect shareholder value." Elizabeth felt the walls of her carefully constructed world beginning to crack. These women had been her allies, her support system, for decades. Their approval had been a cornerstone of her identity. Now, she could sense their judgment, their concern that the Sinclairs might be losing their grip on propriety. Back in the working-class neighborhood, Gregory had made his way to a small community center. Inside, he found a bulletin board covered with college acceptance letters, success stories from local students. Aaliyah's name appeared repeatedly in the thank you notes pinned alongside them. "Mr. Sinclair?" a voice called out. He turned to find an older woman watching him curiously. "I'm Mrs. Rodriguez, the center director. Aaliyah mentioned you might be visiting." "She did?" Gregory asked, surprised. "She was here early this morning, excited about some new program you're planning. Said it might finally give our kids a real chance." Mrs. Rodriguez studied him carefully. "You know, when she first told us she was working in your house, we were worried. Places like yours tend to break spirits like hers. But somehow, she's managed to turn even that into a way to help others." The foundation's launch event was held in one of the Sinclair Corporation's downtown buildings, the very space that would soon become the first education center. The contrast between the usual charity galas and this event was striking. Instead of crystal chandeliers and champagne fountains, the space featured simple, practical furnishings and technology stations. Local catering businesses, many from Aaliyah's neighborhood, provided the refreshments. Aaliyah stood before the mirror in what would become the computer lab, adjusting her modest but professional blazer. Tyler appeared behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "Ready?" "I've never spoken in front of so many important people," she admitted, her voice betraying her nervousness. "What if I mess up?" "Just speak from your heart," Tyler assured her. "That's what got us here in the first place." The main room filled quickly with an unusual mix of attendees. Corporate executives in expensive suits sat alongside community leaders and working students. Elizabeth maintained a careful distance, positioned near her usual social circle, but notably separate from Gregory, who was enthusiastically showing potential donors around the space. When Aaliyah took the podium, the room fell silent. She began speaking about her experiences, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Education shouldn't be a luxury," she declared. "Every day, I meet brilliant minds trapped by circumstance. Single mothers studying between shifts, teenagers working 2 jobs to help their families, immigrants with advanced degrees from their home countries working as janitors because they can't afford recertification." Gregory watched from the side, noting how the audience leaned forward, captured by her authenticity. Even some of his most skeptical board members appeared thoughtful, taking notes and nodding. "This center," Aaliyah continued, "will provide more than just computers and books. It will offer hope, community, and the message that your circumstances don't define your worth or your potential." The applause that followed was genuine, though it was quickly interrupted by a sharp voice from the back of the room. "How touching!" The voice cut through the clapping. "Tell us, Miss Morrison, does your speech about honesty include telling everyone about your past?" The room turned to face Richard L. Ancaster, a former business associate of Gregory's known for his brutal corporate takeovers. He moved forward through the crowd, his expression cold. "What are you doing here, Richard?" Gregory demanded. "You weren't invited." "Oh, but I couldn't miss this," Lancaster replied, his eyes fixed on Aaliyah. "Not when I recognized our little champion of the working class. Though you went by a different name back then, didn't you, sweetheart?" Aaliyah's face had gone pale, but she stood her ground. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Lancaster." "No? Let me refresh your memory. About 5 years ago, working at the Grand Hotel under the name Sarah Williams? Ring any bells?" Lancaster's smile was predatory. "Quite the scandal when the money went missing from the safe. Charges were dropped, but we all knew Dash. That's enough." Tyler started forward, but Aaliyah raised her hand to stop him. "You're right, Mr. Lancaster," she said quietly. "I did work at the Grand Hotel, under my mother's maiden name, because my father had just abandoned us, leaving massive debts. I was 16, lying about my age to get work, but I never stole anything." Lancaster pulled out his phone, showing something to those nearest him. "I have the police report right here. Interesting reading. Want me to share it with everyone?" Gregory stepped forward, his expression thunderous. But before he could speak, a voice from the crowd interrupted. "Actually, Richard, I think it's time we shared a different story." A heavy silence fell over the room as Marcus Morrison, Aaliyah's long-absent father, emerged from the crowd. His expensive suit and confident bearing suggested success, but his face carried the weight of long-held guilt. "Richard," Marcus said, his voice steady, "you know very well what really happened at the Grand Hotel. You were there the night I took that money I used to start the business you later helped me build." Aaliyah stared at her father, years of hurt and confusion evident in her expression. "What are you talking about?" Gregory had gone completely still, his face draining of color as he studied Marcus's features. The resemblance he'd noticed in Aaliyah suddenly made terrible sense. The same determined set of the jaw, the same intelligent eyes. "Your mother," Marcus continued, addressing Aaliyah directly. "She knew what I'd done. She gave me a choice: turn myself in or leave and never contact you again. She wanted to protect you from my shame. So I left, and she took the blame to protect me, using her maiden name to shield you from the scandal." Lancaster's smug expression faltered as he realized his attempt at destruction was backfiring. The room hung on every word of this unexpected confession. "But that's not the whole story, is it, Marcus?" Gregory's voice cut through the tension. "Tell them who helped you start your new life. Tell them who gave you the additional capital you needed, never knowing you were using it to abandon your family." Elizabeth gasped softly, understanding beginning to dawn. "Gregory, what are you saying?" "I'm saying," Gregory responded, his voice thick with emotion, "that 20 years ago, I helped my half-brother start a new life. Our father's indiscretion, carefully hidden from both our families. I never knew he had a daughter who would end up working in my home, falling in love with my son." The revelation rippled through the room. Tyler looked between his father and Aaliyah, understanding transforming his features. "You mean Aaliyah is my cousin?" "First cousin, technically," Marcus confirmed, shame evident in his voice. "When I saw the announcement about this event, about the partnership between the Sinclair Foundation and a young woman named Aaliyah Morrison, I knew I couldn't hide anymore. I came to warn you, Gregory, but seeing her up there, speaking with such passion, she's everything I failed to be." Aaliyah gripped the podium, her knuckles white. "All these years," she whispered, "you were living in luxury while we struggled? While Mom died because we couldn't afford better treatment." Gregory moved to Aaliyah's side, his protective instinct overwhelming any other concern. "The sins of our fathers," he said quietly, "have shaped all our lives. But perhaps they've also brought us to where we need to be." Elizabeth watched her husband comfort Aaliyah, seeing not the maid who had disrupted their social order, but a niece they had failed without knowing. The carefully constructed walls of class and propriety that had defined her life suddenly seemed meaningless in the face of flesh and blood. "The program continues," Gregory announced to the stunned room, his voice gaining strength. "In fact, it expands. The Sinclair Morrison Education Initiative will open centers across the city. Aaliyah will lead it, not because she's family, though she is, but because she earned it. Because she understood something I forgot long ago. True legacy isn't built on money or social status, but on how many lives you change for the better." The room erupted in applause, not the polite kind common at charity events, but genuine, emotional approval. In that moment, old boundaries crumbled and new connections formed. The story of the maid who came to dinner had transformed into something far more profound. A tale of family lost and found, of sins redeemed, and of love that transcended social barriers to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. Tyler took Aaliyah's hand. Their relationship forever changed, but somehow stronger. "Family," he said softly, "comes in unexpected ways." Aaliyah looked at her newfound uncle, her absent father, and the cousin who had become so much more. "Family," she agreed, "is what we make of it." And in that moment, the true dinner surprise was revealed. Not just the breaking of social barriers, but the mending of a family tree long split by secrets and shame, its branches now reaching toward a future built on truth, redemption, and the courage to challenge the boundaries that divide us.